It began, as so many endings do, with an act of love. I was packing my husband's suitcase for his big conference when I found them. The little blue pills that promised a younger man's vigor and a photograph of his secretary that promised she'd be the one to enjoy it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply went to our medicine cabinet, found the industrial-strength laxatives from my last surgery, and made a quiet little substitution. The next morning, as I was watering my hydrangeas, the CEO of my husband's company called my personal line, and his voice was not the sound of a man congratulating his top executive. "Thank you for being here with me today." If you enjoy my story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where in the world you're listening from in the comments. I wish you a good and peaceful listening. The sun fell across the Persian rug in our bedroom that morning, painting the room in stripes of gold and shadow. It was the kind of peaceful, late spring light that made the dust motes dance like tiny, contented spirits. For 50 years, this had been my sanctuary, ours. And for 50 years, the packing of Marcus's suitcase had been my liturgy. It was more than a chore. It was a ritual of care, a quiet testament to the life we had built. A life where my role was to ensure his world ran smoothly, so he could go out and conquer the one outside our door. I ran my hand over the crisp, starched collar of a Sea Island cotton shirt, the kind he only wore for important meetings. I could almost smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne clinging to the fabric, a scent as familiar to me as my own breath. Each shirt was folded into a perfect uniform square. His silk ties were rolled, not folded, to prevent creasing, a trick I'd learned from his father decades ago. One by one, I placed them into the polished leather suitcase, a piece of luggage that had seen more of the world than I had. There was a rhythm to it, a muscle memory in my hands that knew the precise geometry of his travel life. His toiletries were last. The silver-handled razor, the badger hairbrush, the small tub of expensive shaving cream that smelled of sandalwood and citrus. I arranged them in the dop kit, my fingers moving with an efficiency honed over half a century of practice. Finally, I reached for his vitamin case on the nightstand. It was a simple, 7-day plastic organizer filled with the things a man nearing 70 takes to hold back the tide. Vitamin D for his bones, fish oil for his heart, a baby aspirin. Mundane little talismans against mortality. My hand was steady, but the polished wood of the nightstand was slick. The case slipped. It wasn't a dramatic fall, just a soft clatter as it hit the hardwood floor, the plastic lids popping open like hungry mouths. A small constellation of capsules and tablets skittered across the floorboards. I sighed, a small, put-upon sound, and knelt down, my knees complaining gently. I gathered the familiar beige ovals of the fish oil, the chalky white discs of the calcium. But then my fingers brushed against something else. A tiny glass vial, no bigger than the top joint of my thumb, that had rolled under the leg of the nightstand. It had no label. I held it up to the light. Inside, nestled in a bed of cotton, were 4 small, aggressively blue pills. They weren't vitamins. They were the color of a chemical spill, a color that didn't belong in the quiet, sun-drenched landscape of my marriage. A cold prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. It was nothing, I told myself, probably a sample of something from his doctor. But Marcus hadn't mentioned any new prescriptions. He told me everything. Or so I had believed. I stood up, the vial cold in my palm, and looked at his briefcase, which sat open on the luggage rack, ready for his laptop and papers. The unease was an itch now, a quiet command. I ran my fingers along the plush velvet interior of the lid, a place I had no business being. My fingers found a seam that wasn't quite right. A gentle press, and a hidden flap popped open with a faint click. My heart began to beat a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. Inside the secret compartment, there was only one thing. A single photograph, the kind that spits out of a camera moments after it's taken. The glossy surface was still slick, the colors garish. It was his secretary, Tiffany, a girl young enough to be our granddaughter, with hair the color of straw and eyes that held a hard, knowing glint. She was perched on the edge of a hotel room desk, wearing one of Marcus's custom shirts and nothing else. Her legs were crossed, the shirt gaping open to reveal the lacy edge of a bra I had never purchased. She was smiling at the person holding the camera, a smug, triumphant curl to her lips. In the background, out of focus, was the corner of the same leather suitcase I was packing right now. The air didn't rush out of me. It was stolen. The sunlit room seemed to tilt on its axis, the familiar scent of sandalwood and lemon polish suddenly cloying, suffocating. I did not drop the photo. My fingers, traitorously, held on tight, the sharp corners digging into my palm. This small, cheap square of paper was a wrecking ball, and it was swinging through the halls of my life, demolishing 50 years of memories. Our wedding day, the birth of our son Daniel, the quiet Sunday mornings spent with the newspaper and coffee. Every shared laugh, every worried night, every anniversary waltz, all of it was suddenly repainted in the cheap, lurid colors of this photograph. A lie. It was all a lie. The shock was a physical blow, a fist in my chest. But a strange thing happened in the silence that followed. There were no tears. No scream rose in my throat. The white-hot agony of betrayal cooled, rapidly, into something else. Something hard and clear and cold. A glacier forming where my heart had been. I looked from the photo in one hand to the vial of blue pills in the other. The synthetic promise and the sordid proof. My movements became deliberate, precise. I walked out of the bedroom, down the hall to the guest bathroom, my bare feet silent on the cool tile. I opened the medicine cabinet. Behind a bottle of aspirin and a tin of bandages was a small cardboard box left over from my colonoscopy prep 2 years prior. The label was stark, clinical, bisacodyl, industrial strength. I remembered the violent cleansing efficacy of those pills. The doctor had warned me not to take them for more than a day. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of our bed, the mattress giving way under a weight that felt heavier than my own. I carefully opened the vial and tipped the 4 blue pills into my palm. A faint, sterile chemical scent rose from them. The smell of a lie manufactured in a lab. I then opened the box of laxatives and shook 4 of the small, white, chalky tablets into my other palm. They were almost identical in size. I placed the white pills into the vial, tucked them into the cotton, and screwed the cap back on. The little blue pills went into my pocket. I placed the vial back amongst the scattered vitamins on the floor, as if it had fallen out with the rest. I reassembled the vitamin case, snapped its lid shut, and placed it neatly into the DOP kit. I closed the secret compartment in the briefcase. Then, I finished packing the suitcase, my hands as steady as a surgeon's. The liturgy was complete. The next morning, Marcus came down for breakfast, dressed in his traveling suit. He kissed the top of my head, his lips grazing my hair. The gesture, once a comfort, now felt like a violation. "Everything packed, my love?" he asked, his voice smooth and untroubled. "Everything you need," I said, handing him his coffee. My smile felt like a mask I had painted on my own face. "Good luck on your big presentation. I know how important it is." He left, and the house fell into a profound silence. All day, I moved through the quiet rooms, the photo and the blue pills a heavy weight in my apron pocket. I tended my garden. I baked a loaf of bread, the familiar process of kneading the dough a small comfort. But I was waiting. I didn't know for what exactly. A text? An email? Some sign that the small, bitter seed I had planted had taken root. The call came the following afternoon. The house was still, the only sound the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I looked at the screen. The name displayed was not Marcus. It was Sterling, CEO. I answered, my voice calm. "Hello, this is Eleanor Vance." The voice that came through the speaker was not calm. It was a roar, a low, apoplectic growl that vibrated with fury. "Eleanor? Sterling? What in God's name is wrong with your husband?" I feigned confusion. "Mr. Sterling? I don't understand. Is Marcus all right?" "All right? He's a laughingstock. We're all a laughingstock. The man was practically shouting now. He was 10 minutes into the most important pitch of the last decade. A multi-million-dollar merger on the line, the entire board from the acquiring firm flown in, and he just exploded. A sudden, violent, deeply humiliating medical emergency right in the middle of the boardroom. We had to clear the room. The deal is dead, Eleanor. Dead. He didn't just lose a client, he may have sunk the entire acquisition. I stood there, gripping the edge of the cool granite countertop. I listened to his rage, to the details of my husband's catastrophic public failure. And in that moment, I understood. My little act of spite, my petty private revenge, had detonated a bomb at the heart of his career. This business conference wasn't just cover for a sordid weekend with his secretary. It was something far bigger, and I had just spectacularly and publicly destroyed it. A cold, clear thought cut through the CEO's furious tirade. This was just the beginning. I placed the phone back in its cradle, the plastic making a soft final click in the silent kitchen. Mr. Sterling's voice, raw with fury, still echoed in my ears. But beneath the satisfaction, a cold question began to form. His rage wasn't just about a failed presentation or a lost client. It was the sound of a man watching his empire burn. A multi-million-dollar merger, the entire acquisition. The stakes were impossibly high, far too high for a simple conference. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The affair, the pills, the humiliation, they were just the surface. Something much larger and more dangerous was moving in the depths. Later that evening, Marcus called. His voice was thin, reedy, stripped of its usual booming confidence. He sounded like a sick child. "Eleanor," he rasped. "You won't believe what happened. The catering must have been some bad shellfish. I've never been so ill in my life." I stood by the window, watching the last of the evening light bleed from the sky, turning the clouds to bruised purple and gray. I made the appropriate sympathetic noises. "Oh, Marcus, you poor thing. You must be mortified." "Mortified doesn't cover it," he said, and for a moment, a sliver of genuine misery cut through the lie. It was a disaster. He told me he'd be staying at the hotel for a few more days to recover. He couldn't face the flight home, he said. He couldn't face anyone. The lie was a comfortable blanket for him to wrap himself in, and I let him. It gave me time. For the next 2 days, the house was mine. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with purpose. The chemical scent of those little blue pills seemed to have seeped into my memory, a constant, sharp reminder of the synthetic core of the man I had married. It propelled me toward his office. The office was Marcus's kingdom. A room of dark mahogany, leather-bound books, and the faint, pleasant smell of old paper. I had respected its sanctity for 50 years. It was where he worked, where he built the fortune that gave us this comfortable life. My domain was the rest of the house. This room was his. To cross the threshold without him was a trespass, a violation of a long unspoken treaty. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. The room was, as always, immaculate. His desk was clear, except for a single neat stack of papers weighted down by a brass eagle. The pens were aligned in their holder. The leather chair was pushed perfectly square to the desk. It was the portrait of a disciplined, orderly mind, a liar's neatness. I didn't know what I was looking for. Another photograph? Love letters? I ran my fingers along the spines of the books on the shelves. Shakespeare, biographies of presidents and titans of industry. A row of financial ledgers, their dark green covers all identical. I pulled one out. Vance Household Accounts, 1975-1980. I opened it. Marcus's familiar, precise script detailed every expenditure. The mortgage payment on this very house, the cost of the crib for Daniel's nursery, a down payment on our first decent car, a lifetime of shared history logged in neat columns of black ink. It felt like an artifact from another woman's life. I pushed it back into place, the sense of violation so profound it made my stomach clench. My eyes scanned the wall again. Something was wrong. A set of classic novels, Dickens, Tolstoy, Hemingway, bound in identical red leather. They looked too new, too perfect. The gold leaf on the titles was too bright. Unlike the other books, they showed no signs of ever having been read. They were props on a stage, decoys. I reached behind the copy of A Tale of Two Cities, and my fingers met not the wall, but the cool, textured surface of a briefcase. I pulled the books away. It was a slim, hard-sided attaché case made of brushed aluminum with 2 combination locks. I'd never seen it before. It didn't belong with the warm wood and old leather of the room. It was cold, modern, and secretive. I lifted it onto the desk. It was heavier than it looked. The locks were set to 000. I started with the obvious. Our anniversary. 0812. Nothing. Daniel's birthday. 1104. The lock remained stubbornly shut. My own birthday. Nothing. I tried the year we met, the street number of our first apartment, the last 4 digits of his social security number. The tumblers refused to yield. I sat back in his leather chair, the scent of him all around me, and closed my eyes. I pictured the photograph. Tiffany, perched on the hotel desk, a triumphant smile on her face. And then another image surfaced, unbidden. A memory from a few months ago, sorting through the mail at the kitchen table. An internal company newsletter Marcus had brought home, the kind I usually tossed straight into the recycling. This one had a garish, celebratory banner on the front. I'd glanced at it briefly before throwing it away. It was a staff appreciation issue. There was a picture of Tiffany, smiling her vacant, pretty smile, under a headline, "Celebrating a milestone. Happy 30th birthday to our wonderful Tiffany Lowe, June 21st. No, that wasn't right. It wasn't her 30th. She was younger than that. I remembered a comment Marcus had made once about her being just a kid, barely 28. The newsletter must have been celebrating her work anniversary or something else, but the date stuck in my mind. June 21st, 0621. My fingers felt numb as I spun the small metal wheels. 0, 6, 2, 1. I pulled the latch. It clicked open. For a long moment, I just stared at it, the sound of my own breathing loud in the silent room. The betrayal had a date. It had a combination. The key to unlock my husband's secret life was the birthday of the woman he was sleeping with. I lifted the lid. There were no more scandalous pictures, no love letters. The contents were cold, impersonal, and 1,000 times more devastating. The first thing I saw was a stack of professionally printed, glossy real estate brochures. The photograph on the cover was of my home, our home, the one I had helped design, where I had planted the dogwood tree in the front yard from a sapling where I had raised my son. It was described in sterile, seductive language, stately suburban gem, motivated seller, prime for redevelopment. Tucked inside was a surveyor's map, and on it, in Marcus's neat handwriting, were notes. Possible to subdivide lot. Pool can be filled in for more square footage. He was dissecting our life for parts, like a butcher. My hands were shaking now. Beneath the brochures was a manila folder. I opened it. Inside were bank statements. Dozens of them, dating back 2 years. The account was with a bank I'd never heard of, some online entity with a sleek, impersonal logo. The account was in his name only, and the transaction history was a litany of theft. Once a month, every month, a transfer. Withdrawal from Vanguard Joint Fund 401k. $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. A systematic, relentless draining of our retirement savings, the money we had carefully put away for 50 years. Our future, siphoned off into this secret account. I felt a wave of nausea. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. The affair was a knife in the heart. This was an autopsy. This was him methodically stripping the flesh from the bones of our life, preparing the carcass for sale. At the very bottom of the briefcase, alone in its own pristine sleeve, was a single heavy sheet of paper. It was a legal document. The letterhead was from an expensive-looking law firm downtown. At the top, in stark, bold letters, were the words, "Durable power of attorney." I read the dense, legalistic paragraphs. It gave the agent, Marcus Vance, the absolute and unqualified right to act on behalf of the principal, Eleanor Vance. The right to buy, sell, or otherwise dispose of any and all real estate. The right to withdraw from, manage, or close any and all bank accounts, retirement funds, and investment portfolios. It was a document of total surrender, a license to erase me, and at the bottom, waiting was a blank line, a space for my signature. The line for my signature. That small, empty space on the page was a void waiting to swallow me whole. It was the final destination of a 50-year journey. He wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to unmake me, to strip away not just my future, but my past, rendering my entire contribution to our life null and void. The house I designed, the savings I helped accumulate through decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice, it would all become his, to be liquidated and poured into a new life with a girl who saw our history as nothing more than seed money for her own. I laid the power of attorney form on top of the brochures for my own home, the paper cool and heavy in my trembling hands. The pain of the affair, which had felt like the defining wound, was now a distant ache. This was something else entirely. This was erasure. The quiet humiliation of being deemed worthless, an obstacle to be legally and financially bulldozed. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I felt profoundly, terrifyingly alone. I had been a fool, a trusting, loving fool who had spent her life tending a garden while a serpent tunneled underneath, eating away the roots. My first instinct was to hide the evidence, to put the papers back in the secret briefcase and lock it, to pretend this abyss hadn't opened up at my feet. But the anemic voice of my husband on the phone, whining about bad shellfish, echoed in my mind. He thought me a fool. He was counting on it. I stood up from his chair, my legs unsteady. I walked out of his office, leaving the briefcase open on his desk like a gutted animal. I went to the kitchen and picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts, my mind a blank fog of panic. Who could I tell? Who would understand the sheer scale of this, the calculated cruelty of it? Not my son, Daniel. Marcus had been whispering in his ear for years, subtly painting me as the fragile domestic creature who couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of the modern financial world. Admitting this to Daniel would only confirm his father's narrative. There was only one person whose mind was as sharp as her tongue, whose loyalty was absolute. One person who had never, not once in 60 years of friendship, underestimated me. I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring. "Brenda Jackson," she said, her voice the same crisp, no-nonsense tone it had been since we were girls. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Just a dry, ragged sound, the noise of a soul tearing. Silence on the other end. Then softer. "Ellie? What is it? What's happened?" "Brenda," I managed, my voice a stranger's. "Can you come over? Something's wrong. I'm on my way." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She heard the fracture in my voice. Less than an hour later, her sensible sedan pulled into my driveway. Brenda Jackson walked into my kitchen like a force of nature, her salt and pepper hair cut in a sharp, elegant bob, her eyes, behind smart, tortoiseshell glasses, missing nothing. She took in the sight of me, standing white-faced and trembling by the counter, and her gaze softened for just a fraction of a second. She placed her handbag on the table, her movements economical and precise. "All right, Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Talk to me." I led her to Marcus's office, to the open briefcase. She stood over it, her expression unreadable, and looked down at the brochures, the bank statements, the power of attorney. She picked up one of the statements, her eyes scanning the columns of figures. She was silent for a full minute. I felt a hot flush of shame, of humiliation, wash over me. I had let this happen. I had been so blind. Finally, she looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw not pity, but a cold, gathering fury. "All right," she said again, the words like chips of ice. Let's get to work. For the next 2 days, my dining room became our war room. Brenda, a forensic accountant who had spent 30 years hunting for financial predators at the IRS, was in her element. She had me bring every financial document I could find: old tax returns, joint bank statements, investment summaries, brokerage accounts. She spread them across the polished surface of my dining table, turning our shared history into a landscape of numbers and legal clauses. She worked with a quiet, ferocious intensity. I kept her supplied with coffee and sandwiches, watching as she cross-referenced, highlighted, and filled yellow legal pads with her sharp, angular handwriting. She spoke aloud as she worked, not so much to me as to the numbers themselves, forcing them to confess. "Okay, so these are the withdrawals from the Vanguard joint account," she murmured, tapping a statement with the end of her pen. "Systematic, always the third Friday of the month. Never enough to trigger an automatic alert. Smart bastard." She pieced together the timeline, her mind a steel trap closing around the facts. The secret account was opened 2 weeks after Tiffany Lowe was hired as his secretary. The first major transfer from our retirement fund happened the month after Marcus's company announced it was exploring a merger. "There it is," she said on the second afternoon, looking up from her laptop, her eyes glinting. "It's the merger. That's the smoke screen." She turned the laptop towards me. On the screen was a business news article detailing the impending acquisition of Marcus's tech firm by a larger conglomerate. According to this, all senior executives have been offered a golden parachute, a massive stock buyout, and a final bonus, conditional on the deal going through smoothly. She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze unwavering. "Here's what he's doing, Ellie. He's planning to cash out his stocks the moment the merger is finalized. He'll take that final, massive bonus. He's been draining your joint retirement account to build up this secret fund. And the last piece, the very last thing he needs before he can liquidate everything and vanish, is your signature on that power of attorney. That gives him access to the house and the rest of your shared assets. He signs the papers, sells the house out from under you, empties every last account, and then he and little Miss Homewrecker get on a plane and disappear." The scope of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just greed. It was a meticulously constructed exit strategy, an escape plan from a 50-year marriage. Brenda wasn't finished. She opened another file on her computer, a spreadsheet she had built. I cross-referenced the dates of the larger transfers with his company travel calendar. "Look," she pointed to the screen, "a $25,000 transfer in March. That same week, Marcus was at a sales conference in Zurich. Another $30,000 transfer in July. He was attending a tech summit in the Cayman Islands." "These aren't vacation spots, Ellie," Brenda said, her voice grim. "These are banking havens. He wasn't just taking her with him on business trips for fun. They were meeting with offshore bankers. They were setting up the accounts where the money would go when he finally pulled the trigger." This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was a conspiracy, a long-term, carefully planned financial execution. "And you, my friend," she said, her gaze meeting mine, "were the last item on his asset liquidation checklist." The words hung in the air between us. Asset liquidation. That's what I was. Not a wife, not a partner, but an asset to be stripped. The plan was terrifyingly complete. He wasn't just having an affair. He wasn't just leaving me. He was orchestrating a scorched earth departure, a campaign designed to leave me not just heartbroken, but utterly and completely destitute. The merger was his cover. The affair was his motivation. And I was the only thing standing between him and a new life built on the ruins of my own. The last item on his asset liquidation checklist. The words settled not in my heart, which was already a hollowed-out ruin, but in my bones. Brenda packed up her laptop and her legal pads, leaving copies of everything for me in a neat, damning pile on the dining room table. Before she left, she gripped my shoulders, her hands firm, her gaze like steel. "You have 2 choices, Ellie," she said. "You can confront him, file for divorce, and fight this out in court for the next 5 years while he hides the money so well a team of bloodhounds couldn't find it. Or you can play the role he's cast for you, The quiet, trusting, slightly confused wife who doesn't understand the big, important world of men and money. You can let him think he's winning, right up until the moment you burn his entire world to the ground. She squeezed my shoulders once, hard. You know which one I'd choose. I did. Confrontation was honest. It was clean, but it would give him the advantage. He would see me coming. He would lawyer up, hide his tracks, and paint me as a bitter, vengeful woman. No. Brenda was right. My only weapon was his arrogance. His profound underestimation of me was the one asset he couldn't liquidate. By the time Marcus returned home a day later, the secret briefcase was back in its hiding place. The house was immaculate, and I had composed my face into a mask of gentle, wifely concern. He walked through the door looking pale and diminished. He had lost weight, and there were new, deep lines of stress etched around his eyes. He leaned heavily on the hall table as he took off his shoes, a pathetic performance of a man recovering from a terrible illness. "Oh, Marcus," I said, rushing to his side. "You look dreadful. That must have been some terrible food poisoning." He grunted, avoiding my eyes. "It was hell, Eleanor. Absolute hell." He was sullen for days, moving through the house like a thundercloud. He was irritable and short-tempered, snapping at me over the smallest things, the coffee being too strong, the newspaper being folded incorrectly. He was a man whose grand plan had been spectacularly derailed, and his frustration was a sour odor in every room. He had no idea the saboteur was sleeping in the bed next to him. We were sitting at the dinner table a few nights after his return. I had made his favorite, pot roast with root vegetables, a meal that had always been a balm to him in troubled times. He barely touched it, pushing the carrots around his plate with a fork. "We need to talk about our finances, Eleanor," he said suddenly, his voice taking on that familiar, patronizing tone he used when he was about to explain something complicated to me. I put down my fork and gave him my full attention, my face a carefully constructed canvas of mild interest. "This merger at the company, it's a big deal. It's going to change everything. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of restructuring of assets and stocks. It's all very complex." He sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by immense responsibilities. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, which he was still wearing at the dinner table, and pulled out a folded document. He smoothed it on the tablecloth next to his plate. It was the power of attorney. "Our financial advisor said this would make things much smoother," he said, pushing it across the table toward me. "It's just a formality, so I can handle the stock transfers and the brokerage accounts without having to bother you with every little signature. You know how you get flustered by all that jargon." He looked at me, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. I looked down at the paper, at the cold, legal language that would sign away my entire life. "Your world is recipes and spices, Eleanor," he said, his voice softening into a counterfeit tenderness that made my skin crawl. "Leave the serious numbers to me. Just sign it so I can handle things." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, feeling his impatience grow. I picked up the document, pretending to read it, my eyes tracing the words that Brenda and I had already dissected. I could feel his gaze on me, willing me to be the simple, compliant woman he had always believed me to be. I'll think about it, Marcus," I said softly, folding the paper and placing it beside my own plate. "It looks very official." His jaw tightened. "There's nothing to think about, Eleanor. It's for our own good." But I didn't sign it. For the next few days, the document lay on the corner of the kitchen counter, a silent battleground. He would mention it casually, his tone growing a little tighter each time. I would demur, claiming I hadn't had a chance to read it properly, or that I couldn't find my reading glasses. His mask of the weary, convalescing husband was beginning to slip, revealing the cold, grasping man underneath. He was running out of time. The merger was approaching, and his final chess piece was not yet in place. The final blow, the one that extinguished the last smoldering ember of affection I might have held for the man I had married, was delivered by my own son. The phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. It was Daniel. His voice, usually so warm and cheerful when he spoke to me, was laced with an unfamiliar, strained concern. "Hi, Mom," he said. "How are you doing? How's Dad feeling?" "I'm fine, dear," I answered, my heart giving a little lurch. "Your father is still recovering. He's very tired." "Yeah, that's what he said." A pause. "Mom, Dad told me you've been a bit forgetful lately." The world seemed to stop for a moment. The hum of the refrigerator, the chirping of a sparrow outside the window, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. Daniel's voice continued, earnest and worried. "He said you misplaced the tax documents last month and that you sent a check to the power company for the wrong amount. He's worried about you handling the bills, Mom. He thinks it's all becoming too much for you." I closed my eyes. It was a pincer movement, a coordinated attack. Marcus hadn't just been stealing our money. He had been poisoning my relationship with my own son, laying the groundwork for this moment for months, maybe years, planting seeds of doubt about my competence, my memory, my mind, painting a portrait of a dotty old woman who needed her sharp, capable husband to take over. He was using our son's love for me as a weapon against me. It was the most profound cruelty of all. More than the affair, more than the theft. This calculated, deliberate campaign to isolate me and make me doubt my own sanity was an act of pure evil. In that moment, any lingering grief, any trace of the love I once felt, turned to ice. It was a clean, clarifying snap, like a bone breaking. The woman who had loved Marcus Vance died on that phone call. The woman who replaced her was cold, clear-eyed, and utterly resolved. "Don't you worry about a thing, Daniel," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "Your father and I are figuring it all out. You just take care of yourself." I ended the call and stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles were white. He did not see me as a wife. He did not see me as a partner. He saw me as an obstacle, a problem to be managed, gaslighted, and ultimately discarded. That evening, I made a simple supper of soup and bread. We ate in silence. When we were finished, Marcus stood up to clear the plates. "Have you signed that form yet, Eleanor?" he asked, his back to me. His voice was flat, the pretense gone. It was an order, not a request. I watched him for a long moment. He was a stranger, a dangerous stranger who had been living in my house for 50 years. I smiled, a sweet, serene smile that did not reach my eyes. "You know, you're right, dear," I said, my voice light and airy. "It's all gotten so complicated. You should handle everything." He turned around, his face a mixture of relief and surprise. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Let me find a pen." Of course, I didn't find a pen. I made a show of looking, of patting my pockets and opening a few drawers in the sideboard before sighing and saying, "Oh dear, I can't seem to find one right now. I'll sign it in the morning, Marcus. First thing." He watched me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion, but my performance of the flustered, slightly forgetful wife was flawless. He nodded curtly, mollified for the moment. He believed he had won. He believed his pressure campaign had finally worked, breaking down the last of my weak resistance. He went upstairs to his office, leaving me alone in the dining room. The moment he was gone, the smile fell from my face. My grief, which had been a wild, raging storm, had passed. In its place was a profound and terrifying calm. The kind of calm that comes to a ship's captain when the wind dies and the sea becomes a flat sheet of glass, hiding the monstrous depths below. I was a chef my entire life. Not a professional one in a grand restaurant, but a domestic artist. I understood ingredients. I knew that the toughest cuts of meat could be made tender with slow, patient application of heat. I knew that bitter flavors could be balanced with the right amount of sweetness. I knew that a dish's success depended on preparation, timing, and presentation. And I knew that some ingredients were simply spoiled, poisonous. They had to be handled carefully and then discarded completely. Marcus and his little secretary were spoiled ingredients, and I was about to prepare a dish best served cold. The next morning, while Marcus was in the shower, I called Brenda. "He's pushing for the signature," I said, my voice low and urgent. "He tried to get me to sign it at the dinner table last night, and he's got Daniel calling me, worried about my forgetfulness." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "That son of a bitch." "I need a plan, Brenda," I said. "Not a defensive one. An attack." "I've been thinking about nothing else," she replied. "Meet me at the library in an hour. The second-floor study room. Don't bring your phone." At the library, surrounded by the quiet, scholarly scent of old books, we laid our plans. Brenda had already been digging deeper, using her old contacts and her knowledge of corporate structures to map out Marcus's vulnerabilities. The key, she had realized, was not me. It was his company. Marcus wasn't just defrauding his wife, he was a liability to his employer. "He's trying to cash out his stocks as part of the merger," she explained, sketching a diagram on a legal pad. "But if the acquiring company gets a whiff of financial impropriety, especially involving offshore accounts, they could use a morals clause to invalidate his options. He could lose millions. His golden parachute would turn into a lead balloon. The target wasn't just Marcus, it was his reputation. The one thing a man like him valued more than money." "And who?" Brenda asked, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Is the one man who cares more about the company's reputation than Marcus does?" The name fell into place in my mind. Sterling. That afternoon I made the second most important phone call of my life. I dialed the direct line for Mr. Sterling, the CEO, the number still stored in my phone from his apoplectic call a week before. When his assistant answered, I pitched my voice into a register of quiet, grandmotherly distress. "This is Eleanor Vance," I said softly. "Marcus Vance's wife. I'm so sorry to bother Mr. Sterling, but I have some concerns. I've been looking through some of Marcus's papers, trying to help him get organized with this merger, and, well, I'm just a little confused. I'm sure it's nothing, but I would be so grateful for a moment of his time, just to put my mind at ease." I was the worried, slightly dotty wife, the woman who didn't understand serious numbers. It was the role Marcus had written for me, and I played it to perfection. There was a pause, and then the assistant told me to hold. A minute later, Sterling's gruff, impatient voice was on the line. He agreed to a meeting. Discretion was paramount, he said. He suggested a private room at his club downtown the following day. Brenda and I walked into that hushed, wood-paneled room the next afternoon. Mr. Sterling, a man with a shrewd, calculating face and eyes that had seen everything, stood to greet us. He looked surprised to see Brenda, but I simply introduced her as my dear friend who is so much better with these things than I am. We didn't begin with accusations. We began with concern. I laid out the bank statements from the secret account. "I found these, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't understand them. Marcus has been so stressed lately, and I'm worried he's gotten himself into some sort of trouble." Brenda then took over, her tone calm and professional. She walked him through the systematic transfers, the offshore banking trips disguised as business travel, and the timing that aligned perfectly with the merger announcement. She didn't mention the affair. She didn't mention the lies. She framed it all in the language he understood. Corporate malfeasance, financial risk, a threat to a clean acquisition. "Mr. Vance appears to be leveraging company resources to facilitate the movement of undeclared personal assets to offshore accounts," she said, her voice cool and factual. "In the midst of a multi-billion-dollar merger, this kind of activity represents a significant liability. If this were to become public before the deal is finalized..." She let the sentence hang in the air. Sterling's face was a mask of stone, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. He looked at the evidence, then at me, then back at the evidence. He was a shark who had just smelled blood in the water. Marcus was a problem he needed to solve cleanly and quietly, and we had just handed him the solution. He saw an opportunity to remove a compromised executive with cause just before a massive payout without a messy lawsuit. He was now our unwitting pawn. "What do you want, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice low. "I just want to protect my family," I said, playing my part. "And I don't want Marcus to do anything that could hurt the company he's given his life to." A few days later, an official-looking invitation arrived in the mail, embossed with the company logo. It was for the annual Corporate Leadership Awards banquet. I opened it and saw that, ironically, Marcus was this year's recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award. An idea, audacious and terrible and perfect, bloomed in my mind. I called Mr. Sterling's office again. "I see Marcus is receiving an award," I cooed into the phone. "It's such a wonderful surprise. I was thinking, as a tribute from his family, I'd love to put together a little video presentation for the banquet. A surprise for him. Photos of his career, of our family. A celebration of his life's work. Could that be arranged?" There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in Sterling's shrewd mind. A public tribute, produced by the loving wife just before he quietly terminated the man for cause. It was the perfect cover. It would make the company look compassionate and blindsided. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I think that is a wonderful idea. You will have the company's full cooperation." He granted me full control. For the next week, my dining room table was no longer a war room. It was a production studio. Brenda brought over a high-quality scanner and her laptop. We spent hours curating the ingredients for my final dish. We started with the sweet notes. Nostalgic photos of a young, handsome Marcus climbing the corporate ladder. Pictures of us on our wedding day. Daniel's baby photos. Family vacations at the beach. Then, we added the bitter. Brenda scanned the bank statements, highlighting the damning transfers in red. We took screenshots of incriminating emails between Marcus and Tiffany that Brenda had procured. Snippets of them planning their business trips. For the grand finale, I took out the scandalous Polaroid. Brenda scanned it at the highest possible resolution, the digital file capturing every smug detail. She used photo editing software to clean and sharpen the image, making the colors pop with a sickening vibrancy. The plan was set. The trap was built. The centerpiece of the most important night of Marcus's professional life, his Lifetime Achievement tribute, would not be a celebration. It would be an execution. A 5-minute video presented before his peers, his colleagues, his entire world that would meticulously document and publicly unveil every single one of his crimes. His moment of ultimate triumph was about to become his eternal humiliation. The grand ballroom of the hotel was a galaxy of crystal and polished silver. Hundreds of people in tuxedos and evening gowns moved through the soft light, their laughter and chatter rising to the frescoed ceiling like expensive smoke. It was an ecosystem built on reputation and success, and tonight, Marcus was its king. He stood near the head table, a glass of champagne in his hand, accepting congratulations and slaps on the back from his colleagues. He was radiant with self-importance, his earlier sullenness replaced by a preening, magnanimous glow. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. I had arrived separately, with Brenda. I wore a simple navy blue dress, the picture of quiet, supportive elegance. I watched him from across the room. He caught my eye and gave me a benevolent little nod, a king acknowledging a loyal subject. He thought my presence here was part of his triumph. He thought the video I had so lovingly prepared was the final, perfect ornament on the monument he had built to himself. Tiffany was here too. She was seated at a junior executive table, poured into a red dress so tight it looked painful. She kept glancing over at Marcus, a proprietary smirk on her lips. She thought she was just a few weeks away from cashing in her investment, from trading her secretarial desk for a life of offshore accounts and endless sun. They were two predators who had cornered their prey, savoring the final moments before the kill. The arrogance was blinding. It was the fuel I needed. Brenda and I sat at a table near the back, by the audio-visual booth. She had personally delivered the USB drive with the video file to the technician an hour earlier, ensuring it was the only file queued up. She reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her palm was cool and steady. Mine was not. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but on the surface, I was a placid lake. The dinner service dragged on. Course after course of meticulously plated food I couldn't taste. Speeches were made, lesser awards were given. I watched Marcus at the head table, laughing, holding court, basking in the adulation. He was drinking it in, every last drop. Good, I thought. Let the high be as high as it can possibly be. It will make the fall that much farther. Finally, Mr. Sterling took the stage. The room fell silent. And now, he began, his voice booming through the sound system, we come to our final and most prestigious award of the evening, the Lifetime Achievement Award. This year, we honor a man who has been a pillar of this company for over 40 years, a man whose name is synonymous with integrity and success. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Marcus Vance. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. A spotlight found Marcus as he rose from his seat, beaming, his face flushed with victory. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket and strode toward the stage, shaking hands as he went. He looked every bit the titan of industry. He accepted the heavy crystal obelisk from Sterling, held it aloft for the crowd, and then turned to the podium. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all. I am truly humbled." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces, his adoring subjects. "There are so many people to thank, but of course, none of this would have been possible without the unwavering support of my wonderful wife, Eleanor." He smiled in my direction. "And as a special surprise tonight, I believe she has prepared a little look back at our journey together." He stepped back from the podium, his face a mask of smug, sentimental pride. This was it. The ballroom lights dimmed. On the two massive screens flanking the stage, the video began. For the first 60 seconds, it was exactly what everyone expected. The gentle, swelling notes of a classical piano piece filled the room. A black and white photo of a young, impossibly handsome Marcus on his first day at the company faded onto the screen. My voice, recorded in the quiet of my dining room, filled the air. It was warm, nostalgic, and full of love. "I remember the day he started," I said. "He had one good suit and a heart full of ambition." The montage continued. Photos of our wedding, me in a simple white dress, him looking at me with eyes that I once believed held the whole world. Pictures of a tiny Daniel taking his first steps, holding onto Marcus's finger. Corporate milestones mixed with family Christmases. Marcus breaking ground on a new building. Marcus teaching Daniel how to ride a bike. The room was filled with soft, appreciative murmurs. I glanced at Marcus on the stage. He was watching the screen, a single fat tear tracing a path down his cheek. He was utterly captivated by the myth of himself. My recorded voice continued, "We built a life together, a family, a future, a partnership based on trust." On the word trust, the piano music stopped. Abruptly, the silence was a shock. The image on the screen changed. It was a candid shot, a photograph of Marcus and Tiffany sitting together at an outdoor cafe, their heads close together. It was clearly not a business meeting. Underneath, a caption appeared in stark white letters. "Sales Conference, Zurich." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Marcus's sentimental smile froze on his face. The screen changed again. It was a crisp, clear screenshot of a bank statement from his secret account. A single transaction was highlighted in a blood-red box. A wire transfer for $25,000 to a Swiss bank. The date on the transfer was the same day the Zurich photo was taken. My voice returned, but the warmth was gone. It was cold, clear, and calm. The voice of a witness giving testimony. And then, my recorded voice stated, Marcus began to plan for a new future. The onslaught began. A rapid-fire sequence of images flooded the screens, each one a nail in the coffin of his life. A screenshot of a text from Tiffany to Marcus. "Did you get her to sign the POA yet? My new convertible is waiting." An image of the real estate brochure for our home, with Marcus's handwritten notes about subdividing the lot clearly visible. Another wire transfer, this one for $50,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. The murmurs in the ballroom grew into audible gasps. People were sitting forward in their chairs, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Marcus had gone rigid on the stage, his face draining of all color. He looked from one screen to the other, his mouth slightly agape, a man watching his own execution. Then, the final sequence. The scandalous Polaroid of Tiffany in his shirt filled both giant screens, digitally cleaned and impossibly sharp. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, sucked the air from the room. Tiffany, at her table, made a small strangled noise and tried to shrink into her chair. Beside the Polaroid, a close-up image of the 4 little blue pills appeared, their synthetic color glowing under the digital light. My voice delivered the final lines, each word dropping into the cavernous silence like a stone into a well. He had a plan for everything, all the ingredients for his new life. The last slide appeared. On the left, a crisp, dictionary-style definition. Industrial strength laxative, a powerful cathartic agent designed for preoperative bowel cleansing. Not intended for recreational use. On the right, an audio file began to play, and Mr. Sterling's voice, distorted with rage, roared through the ballroom's sound system. A sudden, violent, deeply humiliating medical emergency right in the middle of the boardroom. He may have sunk the entire acquisition. The audio cut off. The screen went black, leaving only a single sentence floating in the silent, horrified room, dictated by my calm, steady voice. Some ingredients, I concluded, just don't sit well. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, profound vacuum, broken only by the sound of a single champagne flute slipping from someone's hand and shattering on the floor. Marcus stood frozen on the stage, a statue of ruin, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror. His lifetime of achievement, his reputation, his entire world had just been systematically dismantled and immolated before the eyes of everyone who mattered to him. And the match had been struck by the quiet, unassuming woman he had relegated to a world of recipes and spices. The black screens held the room captive for a long, stretched-out moment. Then, Mr. Sterling moved. He walked calmly from the wings of the stage, his face impassive, and took the microphone from the podium where Marcus still stood, frozen. Sterling didn't even look at him. He addressed the stunned, silent crowd as if nothing unusual had happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice crisp and authoritative, cutting through the thick silence. "On behalf of the board, I would like to announce that, effective immediately, Marcus Vance's employment with this company is terminated." He paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. "This termination is pending a full and thorough investigation into corporate and wire fraud." A low, collective murmur swept through the ballroom. The spell was broken. People began to talk in hushed, urgent tones, turning to their neighbors, their faces alight with the scandal. At the junior executive table, 2 uniformed hotel security guards had materialized. They flanked Tiffany's chair, their presence large and immovable. She was no longer smirking. Her face was a mess of running mascara and panicked disbelief. One of the guards leaned down and spoke quietly in her ear. She let out a small, hysterical sob, and without another word, was escorted quickly and discreetly out of a side exit, her red dress a fading streak of shame. Marcus finally moved. He staggered back from the podium as if he'd been shot, his hand clutching his chest. The crystal obelisk, his Lifetime Achievement Award, slipped from his other hand and hit the stage with a dull, heavy thud. It didn't shatter. It just lay there, inert and meaningless. He stumbled toward the stage steps, his eyes wide and vacant, seeing nothing. He looked like a man who had suffered a stroke, his mind wiped clean of everything but the raw, searing fact of his own ruin. As his foot touched the ballroom floor, a man in a nondescript gray suit stepped into his path. I recognized him. He was the process server Brenda had hired, a man who had been waiting patiently by the coat check for his cue. "Marcus Vance?" the man asked, his voice polite but firm. Marcus didn't seem to hear him. He tried to push past, but the man was unmovable. He extended a thick manila envelope. "You've been served." Marcus stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't take it. The process server simply tucked it into the breast pocket of Marcus's tuxedo jacket and melted back into the crowd. Divorce papers. The final, legal severing. He had wanted to liquidate me from his life. I had simply beaten him to it. From our quiet corner, Brenda and I watched it all unfold. She had a small, grim smile of satisfaction on her face. I felt nothing. Not joy, not triumph, not even relief. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The battle was over. The war was won. But the battlefield was the ruins of my own life. I was exhausted, down to my very soul. "Let's go, Ellie," Brenda said softly, putting a protective arm around my shoulders. "The show is over." We slipped out the same side exit Tiffany had, leaving the buzzing, electrified ballroom behind. The aftermath was not my concern. I had planted the seeds. The harvest of consequences was for others to reap, and the harvest was swift. The next morning, Brenda called with a report. Sterling and the company had acted with brutal efficiency. They had filed a civil suit against Marcus, and a federal prosecutor, alerted by the company's lawyers, had already opened a criminal investigation. A judge, citing overwhelming evidence of flight risk and asset concealment, had issued an emergency order, freezing every known account bearing Marcus Vance's name. The secret accounts, the offshore funds, our joint savings, all of it was instantly locked down, untouchable. He was, in a single morning, rendered penniless. The social fallout was just as total. The phones at the house began to ring, but I didn't answer. I let the machine pick up. It was a parade of our supposed friends, their voices a mixture of feigned sympathy and ravenous curiosity. People who had clapped for him at the banquet were now distancing themselves as quickly as possible. In our small, affluent community, reputation was currency, and Marcus was now bankrupt. He was a pariah. The most difficult call came that evening. It was Daniel. His voice was choked with shame. "Mom," he said, the word a ragged apology. "Mom, I saw a video online. It's everywhere. What he did, what he tried to do to you." I had no idea. I listened, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "He told me you were getting forgetful," he stammered. "He made it sound like he was protecting you. I was worried. Mom, I am so sorry. I should have known better. I should have trusted you." He was crying now, the sounds of his regret painful to hear. I thought of the bright, loving boy I had raised, and how easily he had been twisted by his father's poison. "I accept your apology, Daniel," I said, and the words were true. I did. He was a victim in this too. But your trust is not the issue here. It's mine. And that is something that will have to be earned back. It will take a very long time. There was a silence on the line, filled with the weight of what was broken between us. He accepted it, his voice small. "I understand, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, dear," I said, and I hung up the phone. The next morning, I did one final thing. I called a 24-hour locksmith. A young man with kind eyes and capable hands arrived within the hour. He worked efficiently, drilling out the old cylinders on the front door, the back door, the door from the garage. He replaced them with new, heavy-duty deadbolts. When he was finished, he handed me a set of 3 small brass keys. They felt solid and real in my palm. "All set, ma'am," he said. "Nobody's getting in without one of these." I paid him, and he left. I stood in the foyer of my silent house, the new keys clutched in my hand. The scent of machine oil hung in the air, a clean, metallic smell of finality. I walked to the small decorative bowl on the hall table, the place where, for 50 years, Marcus and I had tossed our keys. His heavy, jangling ring with the keys to this house, his cars, and his office was still there. I picked it up. It felt foreign in my hand. Useless. I walked to the kitchen, opened the trash can, and dropped the keys inside. They landed with a dull, unsatisfying clatter on a bed of coffee grounds. This house was no longer ours. It was mine. The locks were changed. The final, decisive act of reclaiming my space, my home, my life. He was locked out. Forever. 1 year later, the late afternoon sun slanted through the leaves of the old dogwood tree, dappling the lawn in shifting patterns of light and shade. The air in my backyard was thick with the scent of newly mown grass and the sweet perfume of my climbing roses. It was filled with the sound of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the low, happy hum of conversation. The house was the same brick, the same windows, the same roof, but it felt entirely different. It was lighter. The oppressive weight of 50 years of secrets had been lifted, and the rooms could finally breathe again. I moved through the small crowd of guests, my friends, carrying a pitcher of iced tea sweetened with mint from my own garden. Brenda was holding court by the azaleas, making a group of women from her yoga class roar with laughter. My son, Daniel, stood by the grill, carefully turning skewers of marinated shrimp. He had been a quiet but constant presence in my life over the past year, showing up every Saturday to help with the yard work, fixing the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, sitting with me on the porch. He never asked for forgiveness again. He was earning it, one small, consistent act of devotion at a time. The trust between us was a tender new shoot, but it was growing. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. It wasn't a battle. It was a surrender. With Marcus facing federal charges and his assets frozen, and with the mountain of evidence Brenda had compiled, his lawyers had advised him to settle quickly and quietly. The settlement was more than fair. The house was mine, free and clear. My portion of our savings and investments, the portion he hadn't managed to siphon away, was restored to me. I was not just solvent, I was secure. Marcus had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud to avoid a longer, more public trial. He was serving an 18-month sentence in a low-security federal prison. Tiffany had disappeared. After being fired, she had testified against Marcus in exchange for immunity and had vanished back into the anonymity from which she came. They were ghosts. Faint, sad echoes from a life that no longer belonged to me. I had found a purpose for the anger and the pain. With a portion of the settlement, I established a scholarship at the local community college. The Eleanor Vance Culinary Arts Grant for promising young students who needed a little help buying their first set of knives or paying for tuition. It was a legacy of my own making, built not on stocks and mergers, but on flour and butter, and a belief in the nourishing power of a well-made meal. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink, the party wound down. Guests drifted away with hugs and promises to see me soon. Eventually, only Brenda and I were left, sitting in the comfortable wicker chairs on the patio, the fireflies beginning to blink in the growing dusk. Daniel came over, kissed my cheek, and said he'd be back next week to help me mulch the flower beds. I watched him walk through the house and leave by the front door, my heart full of a quiet, healing love. Brenda and I sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening symphony of the crickets. She swirled the ice in her glass. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked, her voice soft. I followed her gaze to the garden, to the rose bushes I had pruned and fed, now heavy with fragrant, perfect blooms. I thought about the man who had shared this view with me for 5 decades. The man who saw this land not as a sanctuary, but as a lot to be subdivided. The man who believed a small, blue synthetic pill could give him the power to replace the life he had with a new one. A genuine smile touched my lips. "Sometimes," I admitted, "I think about how little he understood. He thought those pills, that money, that girl, he thought they were the ingredients for a better life, a younger, more exciting model. But he never understood substance. He never knew the difference between something real and something manufactured." I took a slow sip of my iced tea. The flavor was clean, bright, and true. Mint and lemon and sunshine. "In the end," I said, more to myself than to her, "I was the one who did the replacing. I took his lies and I replaced them with the truth. I took the bitter sorrow he gave me and replaced it with this." I gestured to the peaceful, thriving garden, to the warm lights glowing from inside my house, to the quiet, sovereign life that was now mine. He thought his life with me was hollow and that he needed to fill it with artificial things. "But this," I said, feeling a profound sense of peace settle into my bones, "this is a life made from scratch." I had replaced a synthetic marriage with a genuine existence, one that was all my own and deeply, deeply satisfying. Thank you so much for joining me on Eleanor's journey. If her story resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly love reading them and hearing how the story made you feel. Your support means the world to me. Be well and take care of yourselves.